Like, what, like freedom of speech, I guess.
Yeah, so there's maybe an example of like some of those rights, but like what is the phrase like certain inalienable rights mean to you?
Like rights that you can't take away.
Rights that you can't take away. Bingo, right? Natural rights that cannot be infringed upon. These are certain like human rights, right? That's definitely what you're seeing. Phrase endowed, endowed by the creator with certain inalienable rights. Important to realize too, we're a secular country, right? We don't have a national religion. We have separation of church and state, but they still do kind of draw upon some religious things with the idea of endowed by their creator, right? That plays a role a little bit, but it doesn't play obviously a central role in government. What does the phrase just powers mean? You got it? You keep shaking your head yes at me like you got it. What's a just power? Power just. You tried. Okay. What's just powers?
Powers that are deserved, I guess.
You're hitting it right on the head today. Powers that are deserved, maybe powers that are justified, right? It's just like that idea of the Declaration of Independence. It's kind of in the name, right? So just powers, right? They're powers that the government holds, right? So they're powers that the government holds, but they're also powers that are fair, powers that aren't super tyrannical. Maybe gets into the idea of how far the government can go, limited government, things like that. What does the phrase consent of the governed mean? You're scared to look at me now every single time, I know. What does consent of the governed mean? What is consent? Give permission, right? So what is consent of the governed? Approval by the people, right? The idea with popular sovereignty. The people agreed to give the government power. Where does the government get its power from? The people. And that's because the people are consenting to that. They're allowing it. What are some major issues with the Articles of Confederation? There's a couple. Just what are some of them? What are any of them? Articles of the Confed. Yeah. Yeah, what's that all about, right? Like, hey, we got this thing set up, but follow it if you want, right? So yeah, that's an issue. So it's not powerful enough. There's no real powerful central government. Can't really force the states to obey the things that are put forth in it. What else? What do you say? For 12. Yes, for 12. Yeah, go for it. So the government has no taxing, right? The power could, the government could be like, hey, can we have some money? And states could be like, no. And that would be the end of it, right? Nowadays, do you pay taxes? Yes. Anybody here have a job? Yeah. You got a job? I got a job, right? I'm here right now. I got to pay taxes every single time I get a check for that. And then, I get a tax return eventually, but some people don't. It's depending on how much taxes you pay. I didn't get my stimulus check yet. Kind of upset. I definitely qualify. No stimmy from Joe. Other than that, yeah. So no power for taxing. What else? There's another big one. There's a couple other ones, but there's another really big one. It has to do with the certain rebellion. Shays' Rebellion, yeah. So, they couldn't create a standing army, right? They also can't really get involved, right? They can't really get involved with state issues. So with Shays' Rebellion, there's a question about that later on, but I guess we can knock it out right now. Does anybody remember what Shays' Rebellion is? Who it involves? Shay, Daniel Shay, yeah. Shay and whatever that band is. Yeah, farmers, right? And they're kind of uprising. They're upset because there's a bunch of people being put in debtor's jail. And so they're uprising. And the government is like, good luck, I guess, because they can't do anything under the Articles of Confederation. So the states, that's where the kind of well-armed militia type idea also comes from. States had the right to have their own militia, so the states just had to kind of put it down on their own. But oftentimes that's like basically, again, going up against your neighbor, no different than civil war. So it's one, that's a little awkward, and two, you're probably not that very well equipped. The other big thing is no interstate trade regulations, right? So there's that as well. So to review, no taxing, no interstate trade regulations, no power to intervene in state issues. Shays' Rebellion plays a role there. And then they couldn't really force the states to obey the laws or things put forth in the Articles of Confederation. Under the Articles of Confederation, the United States was considered what? Think about the houses. What do we call it? a weird word. You don't really hear it that often. The opposite of bicameral.
Toyota Camry.
Not Toyota Camry. Yeah. Unicameral, right? And what does that mean? There's one house, right? Today, we're bicameral. Obviously, we have the House and we have the Senate. What you're having here, under the articles, it's unicameral. There's one House legislature. There's no executive branch. There's no judiciary. There's not really a huge kind of checks and balances system. Representation becomes kind of an issue, especially later on. Representation is a bit of an issue with Shays' Rebellion even, and looking at a lot of the different things that come from that. Definitely. So yes, unicameral. How were the states represented in Congress under the Articles of Confederation? Does anybody know? What's the representation look like? You're unicameral, right? Anybody online know? Feel free if you want. No pressure. It's multiple choice, I believe. Don't worry. With this one, okay, I'll give you this one. Unless anybody, last chance, anybody really clamoring to answer this one?
Is it population?
Not population, not yet, right? Not yet, but it will be there soon, right? Very, very soon. And this that definitely plays a role in this answer, right? The answer that you have here is going to basically directly lead into some issues, right? So what you have immediately under the Articles of Confederation is 2 to 7 representatives per state. Okay, you basically have like a bunch of people who can come together and deliberate about a bunch of different things. And yeah. Yes, they only have one vote. And that's where the kind of, confusion and stuff comes with that. You have a couple of people that you're sending forward, but each state only has one vote. And so that eventually is going to be an issue later on, especially when we look at population size, exactly, which is mentioned a couple of times now. Like population is going to play a big role, especially looking at some of these compromises that we see later on, some plans like New Jersey plan and Virginia plan. And so that's just like, we're just not there yet, but we're getting like really close to it. Okay. So how did the states interact with each other under the Articles of Confederation? What is it like? Anybody know? Is it unified or no? No, not really, right? It's kind of independent. Okay. So with this one, power stayed largely independent and among the states. Remember, if you don't have to listen to really the Articles of Confederation, everybody's kind of doing their own thing with this really loosely created centralized government, all right? Really loose centralized government, and that is just kind of where they're at. Didn't even remember again on this, my bad. Why did the Articles of Confederation fail? We've already kind of given some problems with them. What's like a concrete answer? Like, what's going on with them? What's the biggest issue, really? Yeah, Noah. Amendments, that's definitely a huge issue, right? And it's still difficult to get amendments today, but it was like nearly impossible back then. What else? What's another huge issue? Like, what does it really boil down to? Yeah. Didn't fully unite the states by any means, right? Everybody's kind of still independent. It's like you're the state, but you're still like pretty separate. But it really comes down to, and that's a correct answer, both of you, but it really comes down to this one big thing. One big thing. There's not enough what? Yeah. There's not enough federal government power, right? And some people are looking at and saying, we don't want federal government power. Why? Because the government, they've been kind of hosed by the government for a while, right? They've been they've had a bad run of it with King George, right? So they're looking at this, and that's kind of the idea immediately with the Articles of Confederation is, we're going to make this loose government. We're going to fight against tyranny. We're not going to give it too much power. But it turns out that the biggest issue is that they don't give it enough power, right? There's no power for intervention. There's no power for regulation or tax. And then it's just too weak, right? So Shays' Rebellion, what was it? An armed uprising of farmers in Massachusetts. You have all these guys mad because they're in debt. They're getting put in debtor's jail, basically like holding for their money that they owe. And they get mad and they kind of have an armed uprising. And what happens there, again, this just kind of paints a picture of how the Articles of Confederation are not good enough, especially at this time, because it's actually pretty lucky that the state was able to put down the uprising. There's a good chance that they maybe would have failed, right? They wouldn't have been able to get the help of the government. Number 18, what impact did Shays' Rebellion have on the people and the government of the United States? Any ideas here? There's no real, there's a couple of, concrete answers, but there's a couple ones that maybe could go either way. What does it lead to? Shays' Rebellion.
More government power?
More government power, right? It leads to the Constitution. It leads to a new Constitution. People look at this and they're like, wow, maybe the articles aren't the best thing for us. What else does it do? What does it show? What does it unveil?
How weak they are?
Absolutely, right? It unveils how weak the government might be. It shows weaknesses in the government, kind of outlines what you might need to change when it comes to the Constitution. And then finally, one of the things that's been mentioned a couple of times is, representation. It leads to equal representation among states. It leads to better representation. We start to eventually shy away from unicameral houses. We also shy away from this kind of original idea of meeting up and having one vote and all this other stuff. And it leads to kind of a more complex voting system as well. Eventually, not right away, but it's part of it. What is the purpose of the Constitution? Not the same as the Declaration. Don't get them confused. What is the purpose of the Constitution?
Lay out the powers of the government?
You're killing it, right? You're laying out the powers of the government. You're defining. You're explaining. In several cases, you're also limiting the powers of the government, right? That is absolutely correct. Rapid fire, which branch of the government is made up of 2 houses of Congress? Everybody. Come on, Kagan. Legislative, correct. Legislative. Which branch is made up of the president of his cabinet? Sorry, president and his cabinet. Executive, right? Which branch is made up of the Supreme Court and the lower courts? Judicial. Next one, which branch has the authority to enforce the laws? Executive. And then which branch has the authority to interpret the laws? Judicial. And finally, which branch has the authority to make the laws? Legislative, right? Yes, that's the legislature. That is the people who are coming together, the House and the Senate, creating laws, drafting bills. Number 26, define federalism. What is it? What is federalism? It's pretty straightforward, kind of. Don't think too hard into it. Yeah, Michael.
Powers of the government, the powers of the government shall be equal.
Yeah, that's definitely part of it for sure. But there's also it gets it even simpler than that, right? Even simpler than that. What is it? Yeah.
Is it when there's a big government and then there's smaller government?
Yeah, you have one kind of federal government, and then you also have federal and state. It's just the kind of the presence of 2 governments more than anything, right? You have 2 kind of setup of governments. Powers divided, right? It gets back to that idea of kind of checks and balances, stuff that happens there. National governments, state governments, both have powers over the same constituency. This gets you into the idea of what is federally illegal, right? If you know that marijuana is illegal on a federal level, but at the same time in Illinois, right across the border, or in Michigan, either bordering state, marijuana is recreationally legal, right? Federally, not legal. State level, legal, right? So what you see there is that you have different powers between the 2. And sometimes with cases like that, the federal government can choose to enforce federal laws, or they can choose to leave that power to the states. In that situation, it's something that, as of recent history, has been kind of left to the states, okay? Define separation of powers. Get back into federalism as well. What is that? What does it mean to separate something? Split it up, right? Separation of powers, what does that mean to you? To split up the powers, right? We talked about a couple of branches: legislative, executive, judicial. Separation of powers, again, maybe plays back a role into federalism as well. The federal government, national government, and then the state governments. This is making sure that, the power is divided into various branches. And what is it meant to do? What's the reason?
So
No one gets too powerful, right? We don't want another King George. We don't want a dictatorship. It's meant to limit power. It's meant to stop tyranny. Which gets us into the next question. Define checks and balances. What is that to you? Checks and balances.
Same thing.
Same thing, right? Kind of is, right? It's kind of in the same boat. Checks and balances, same thing as separation of powers, pretty much. Making sure that one branch or system of government cannot be too strong or abuse power, okay? Think of an example of one branch checking another branch of government. What's some examples of this? Like, how does one government branch limit another? What's the biggest one that we always hear? There's one that's like the most prominent, honestly. What do you say? Vetoes, right? That's definitely one. Vetoes for sure. Being able to veto a bill. What else? Anything else? What else might happen? We say impeachment, right? Absolutely. There can be impeachment involved as well. Maybe impeaching a member of Congress or a president or whoever. Yeah, somebody else got one. I know it. We got executive, legislative, judicial.
Yeah, like.
What does the judicial branch do? What's their big power? Yeah, no, go say it. Say it. Yes, they decide if something is unconstitutional. Absolutely right. That wasn't always the situation, right? That came about kind of later on. But yeah, when something's unconstitutional, you always hear about this. The Supreme Court, it's like their superpower, right? They come through, they can check the actions of the House, they can check the actions of the president by saying, like, what you did was unconstitutional. For example, if the president just decided to unilaterally declare war on like Afghanistan or something, that is something that needs to go through the Congress. Okay, so if he did that, perhaps the judiciary could look and say this is an unconstitutional matter and that could be, null and void or whatever. Same thing happens with like other major cases, things like Roe v. Wade, things like the legalization of gay marriage. These are all things that kind of play a role with judicial review. Number 30, this is getting back to that idea of something that's been mentioned several times by you, I think, Ella, with population, right? So why did smaller states favor the New Jersey plan over the Virginia plan? Does anybody know?
Was it equal voting power?
Yeah, that's the thing, right? So with the New Jersey plan, smaller state, right? It's equal representation no matter the population. The big difference is, what do you see with Virginia? What are they like? They small?
No, they're like the capital, right?
Yeah, they're like massive. They're like a pretty big power during the time, especially Virginia. So you have Virginia is basically saying, it should all be population. And New Jersey is saying, well, I think it should all be equal. But there's way less people living in New Jersey. So Virginia is like, that doesn't seem fair to me. But New Jersey at the same time is like, that, your plan doesn't seem fair to me either. So that's why smaller states favor the New Jersey plan. With that being said, they do come to a compromise. We have the Connecticut Compromise, also known as the Great Compromise. What does this create? It kind of makes our government what it is today. Remember, we were previously unicameral, so what are we now? Great Compromise. Bicameral, right? We're bicameral legislation. It means we have the House and the Senate. How is the House powers? How is that determined? How do we figure out how many representatives we have? Somebody online, how do we figure out how many representatives we have?
Population?
Yeah, no, you're fine. Yeah, population, right? We figure out representatives through population. That's why the House has like 435 representatives. That's why California, one of the most populous states, has a large number of representatives compared to somewhere like New Jersey. And then we have the Senate. How do we figure out the Senate?
Only one person.
Yeah. Isn't it? It's two, but it's equal for everyone.
Yeah, 2 senators per state, right? But it's equal, right? So it's equal. So it doesn't matter if you're Rhode Island or if you are California. You have 2 senators that come together for that state, and you have 100 senators total, right? 100 senators total. That's the big difference. So what this is basically is a mix of the New Jersey plan and the Virginia plan together. It's kind of like the best of both worlds, right? That's a kind of a way to appease everybody. Moving forward with that, we have the 3/5 compromise. What does that settle? What does that say, the 3/5 compromise? Somebody online, what is the 3/5 compromise? I need the Jeopardy music. Fabian, you want to do it for us? Jeopardy music?
All
right, we'll move in person. Somebody got 3/5 compromise? Yeah, Michael. Yeah, so like 60%, right? So it's every slave counts as 3/5 of population, right, is where it gets to. So if you're looking at the House of Representatives, every slave is counted as 3/5 of a person. So they don't add up to an entire person effectively in the law. But adding them all together, that's kind of a big deal. Why do you think this is a thing? Why did it happen? Why was that something that people were arguing for or arguing against?
Well, did you say it was southern states were smaller for the most part?
Yeah.
Had less population.
What you'll see in a lot of southern states is that their population, especially of white people compared to maybe African Americans or slaves, what you're going to see there is that they're largely outnumbered in many ways. And they're also usually kind of small populations, right? The northern states, the more industrialized states, are usually a little bit higher in population density, urbanization, all that stuff. With the southern states, they're looking at this and they're like, well, we don't want to be underrepresented according to them at least. They don't want to be underrepresented because they have a significant population. Now, there's obviously arguments for and against that people have made. One of them being obviously, well, why would they be counted if you don't count them as whole people? Now you're going to start, what is your overall goal here? And the whole goal there with the South is basically to make sure that they have more representation in the House, right, and carry more power forward. Number 33, what is judicial review? We just talked about it.
Checking if something's constitutional.
Yeah, checking if something's constitutional or unconstitutional, right? It's the ability for the courts to deem unconstitutionality. This is what really makes the judiciary pretty powerful. Judicial review is a big reason why, it's such a hot issue of whether or not, somebody like Kavanaugh gets inducted into the Supreme Court, or if somebody else, any sort of presidential nomination for a court justice. Obviously the life appointment, but also things like judicial review, whether or not that court flips into a more liberal or a more conservative kind of state, and whether or not they might, utilize their power of judicial review to do something like reverse the actions of Roe v. Wade. That's where a lot of that stuff comes into. Number 34, why did the Federalists support ratification of the Constitution? What did they think? What's their big thing? Federalists.
A lot of government.
Yeah, they want more government, right? You want more government. They also think that, so they think that a stronger national government is needed, right? That's their big thing. And then in addition to that, they thought the future of the U.S. basically depended on it, right? They think that the future of the U.S. depends on this. They saw the failures of the Articles of Confederation, and they go a little extreme with some things, and that is where the critics of the Federalist papers and the critics of the Constitution come in and they kind of say, hey, we need something else. So that's where 35 comes in. What was an important argument the anti-Federalists had against the proposed Constitution? What's the issue with it? What's the second thing that we talked about? We talked about the origins of government, we talked about the Constitution, and then we talked about what?
Are you talking about the lack of anti-federalists want they're scared of another King George?
They are. They're scared of a strong national government. They're scared of a strong federal government. They're worried that the government's going to be too powerful. They also have this other big thing that they kind of proposed. I'm sure you'd love them. You have them right now.
Constitution.
Well, you're close.
Bill of Rights.
Execution? What are you talking about? What? What did you say?
Bill of Rights.
Bill of Rights. Exactly. Execution. I don't think you'd like that. Yes, the Bill of Rights. That's their big thing. They're like, hey, we don't want the government to be too powerful, so maybe we should institute this Bill of Rights, right? Those 10 amendments that come together, and you got your freedom of speech, you got your due process, all that sort of stuff that we went through and talked about together. So they do make that compromise. Eventually, we do have the Bill of Rights. What did the Federalist Papers attempt to do? What's the reason for them? Remember Alexander Hamilton? Has anybody ever listened to Hamilton or seen it? Yeah. He's like, John Jay wrote one. Who else is it?
John Jay wrote
four. Yeah, and then Hamilton wrote the other, however many, 51, right? What is the point of the Federalist Papers? Just for fun? Maybe Hamilton, he loved to write, yeah. Yeah, it's to get like support. It's like petitioning almost. It's like going out, hey, sign this, it's a way also to like explain the Constitution to people. People might not know what they're voting for or ratifying against. So it's an educational thing in one way, but it's also a persuasive thing, right? It's a bunch of persuasive essays of like, this is why we need the Constitution. So that's the whole point. There's a bunch of Federalist Papers that come out, and they work. They work. Why was it critical to the success of our new nation to have both New York and Virginia ratify the Constitution? Does anybody know? Most populated, especially Virginia, and then also New York, a big hub, kind of like the big landing spot at the time. Yeah, that's definitely it, right? They have a lot of weight is the big thing, right? They're kind of the big dogs. They're the big shots at the time. Without their support, the Constitution had a really good chance of failing, right? Even if all the other states ratify, you also want to make sure that all of your states are together and in on it. If House of Cards could fold on itself, kind of that same idea right there. Next, the first 10 amendments to the Constitution are called the Bill of Rights, right? What is the major purpose of the Bill of Rights?
Establish the rights and freedom.
Establishing, putting out like a written form of it, right? Protecting the basic rights of citizens. It also at times does limit government in some ways, right? So the government, you have freedom of speech, freedom of press, petition, right? Freedom of religion, all these different things that come together. And the government can't really infringe or impede on those. The Bill of Rights protects the what? Who does it protect?
People.
You and me, right? The people. From who? The government. Exactly. The Bill of Rights protects the people from the government. Number 41. I keep forgetting to go over here. What are 3 things that are true about the Bill of Rights? There's so many different answers to this, so just give me 3. What's true about them? There's 10 of them, right? They're the first 10 amendments. What else?
It was by Bill.
By Bill? Bill wrote them? No.
It was written to gain support of those who feared the idea of having a powerful central government.
Yeah, that's absolutely true, right? The Bill of Rights is introduced again by the anti-federalists. They're coming in, hey, if you're worried about too strong of a federal government, let's introduce these things to maybe protect you. And it's another kind of form of compromise. A lot of these things are living documents during the time, and a lot of this stuff is like, stuff that's kind of being made to appease each other and create a working government, right? So yeah, that's absolutely right. What else? What's another one? You could even tell me like what some of the Bill of Rights, what does it let you do? Anything. Freedom.
Pray.
Freedom. What?
Pray.
Pray. Yeah, you can pray. Freedom of religion, right? What else? Basic human rights, yeah. What else? What is one more thing that's true about the Bill of Rights?
You could publish an article.
Yeah, freedom of press. Sure, we'll roll with that. It also, another big thing, 9 and 10, right? Amendments allow for the power rights not specifically listed. So it's also, the Bill of Rights is not completely exhaustive. It's not the only rights that you have. There are rights outside of it as well. Maybe that's one that you could put too. Number 42. What does the First Amendment address? Give me the 5 different freedoms. Okay, and what's one of them? One.
Freedom of speech.
Freedom of speech, right? No, what's another? Oh, sorry. What's another? Michael. Freedom of religion. Speech, religion, that's what we got so far. That's part of it. But what's like one of the, so you have like establishment and free exercise. That's definitely part of the First Amendment. But like, what's one of the specific freedoms?
Press.
Press. Petition, right? Protest. Assembly, right? So we have freedom of speech, religion, petition, assembly, and the press. It's easy to get, even if you know everything about constitutional law, I feel like sometimes you go through this and you're like, you get 4 of them, and then you always get to the last one. It doesn't matter. You're always like, what is the last one? So that does happen sometimes. Just make sure you're brushing up on them. What is the Establishment Clause, Michael?
Government can make no laws about the establishment of religion, creating a governmental religion, or creating like a national religion.
Exactly.
and they cannot impose, like, you can't practice a religion and
It-
like respect another way.
So that gets into 44 as well. So you have the establishment, right? So the government can't create their own national religion. Obviously, the United States has heavy roots in Judeo-Christianity, right? That's a huge thing. Whether or not a president could run on the platform of being an atheist, he certainly could. He could swear on whatever sort of document he wants, but will they? Probably not anytime in the near future, I don't imagine, but, they could, right? So the government can't impede against that. They can't prohibit, they can't set up a national established religion. That gets into the idea of a lot of the stuff that we saw with, like, government property, with religious things happening on government property, all that stuff that we kind of looked at in those slides. And then the next thing that Michael said was talking about, not forcing you to do any certain thing, and that gets into the free exercise clause. The free exercise clause, you can freely practice any religion or not practice any religion that you want. The government can't really do anything about that to you. Number 45, with a separation of church and state, what are 3 things that you're free to do? We've already kind of talked about some of these. What's one big one? Church and state. It kind of gets into the free exercise clause as well.
Practice whatever you like,
Whatever you want, right? Practice any religion. Or what?
or not.
Or practice no religion. Or just practice religion in general. Okay? So, practice religion, practice a variety of religions, practice no religion. These are all three things that can kind of fall together on the separation of church and state. Okay? What do we mean by freedom of the press? Ken, you know this one. Freedom of the press. What is it? Freedom to do the bench press?
No, really,
No.
like, I will.
Libel? Well, that gets into some of the ideas. What's freedom of the press? You better be studying. Anybody know? Yeah.
Like, write, whatever, just write about whatever, like, I mean, unless it's like, where you like say bad things about people, slander. whatever.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like, if it's true, you can kind of report it. But if you get into the point of like defamation of character, libel, slander, like you did say, Cancer, you're not like, it's not like you're off on that. You're correct there, right? Those are parts of the things that come together. I know, Michael, you said something as well.
Government being stupid.
Yeah, you can say things about the government too, right? That's all part of it. You're not going to see this in like a communist government for the most part. You're not going to see like
China.
yeah, right. You're not going to see, especially even in China today, you're not going to see, or Russia, you're not going to have like a big publication coming out unless it's like on the underground talking poorly about the government. Now, I've said this a billion times, it kind of gets into this idea of freedom of speech too. It is included in the First Amendment. So just like you have Fox News, CNN, they can say whatever they want about the political candidates. Certainly each sect of news there bends the truth wherever they wish. But whether or not you can like truly prove that as being a lie and all this other stuff kind of comes together. Fake news is like a thing. It's like the freedom of the press is a thing, right? You can pawn off a lot of that stuff and say it's like satire or what have you, but it's stuff that it is allowed, right? Also, but you're right though, it does get into that idea of like libel, defamation of character, slander. Those things do kind of play a role in the First Amendment as well. Why do some people argue that the Second Amendment is outdated? Some people, not everybody, right? This is not a universal thing, but it is a point of contention. Some people have these opinions, some don't. What are some of the things that are said?
1791.
Yeah, it's an old document. It's often argued as a living document, as we always kind of argue for it. What else? It's important to think. I mean, especially given the recent context with like Colorado and everything that's happened there. What else are we seeing? Yeah, that's a definite kind of argument that a lot of people make. If you look at other countries, we're definitely number one, right? Number one in the United States. Other than that, it can be, right?
It counts in all suicide.
We also think of, but again, suicide by gun is not. It's remember we looked at that graph and we looked at suicide does play a role, but it's not like the primary role, right? It could be, yeah. And we'd have to look more directly into a lot of those statistics. Like, I'd probably have to pull them up before I have like an educated conversation on it. But I think that plays a role for sure, Gabrielle. There's another thing too that I think gets into that too, is we just have a way larger population too than we did back then as well, and that plays a role as well, right? So yeah.
Like a lot of developed countries, they have very strong gun control,
Yeah.
so they don't have gun deaths, but with their stabbing or
Yeah.
other murders. You look at Britain, they banned guns, they like every gun, and now they're like, you have to provide a license and ID on a kitchen bag, because that's how far up their stabbing is.
Yeah, there's a bunch of like, obviously there's a bunch of differences in like either side, differences in opinion, obviously. But the main thing here is just like looking at this and just saying like, what are some of the arguments for this? And then, again, like I said, there's obviously arguments against it. There's arguments on either side. You do see that there are some arguments. Some people argue that the Second Amendment is outdated as well. If you're looking at the Colorado kind of situation that just happened, maybe the ease of access for guns is a thing too that people have an issue with at times. How easily obtainable a gun is definitely something that you might throw on there as well. Number 48, what court order allows police to enter private property and collect evidence? What do you call it? You want to come in my house?
Isn't it a warrant?
Yeah, search warrant, right? You want to come in my house, you better come back here with a search warrant, right? Has anybody ever seen The Sopranos? No? Really aggressive show, but maybe watch it sometimes. Pretty good. Every single time that the police show up to Tony Soprano's house, they're standing on the outside. He's like, warrant. You got a warrant? No? Then leave, right? It's the same idea. You need a search warrant to enter private property and collect evidence. What is probable cause? It's an easy one. Yeah, reasonable suspicion, right? Exactly. Reasonable suspicion of a crime. Number 50, what is the exclusionary rule? Think about OJ. We talked about OJ. This was argued for, but they didn't quite get it. Search warrant was also playing a role in OJ as well. What is the exclusionary rule? What does it mean to exclude something or someone? Push them to the side, right? Get them out. What is the exclusionary rule?
Evidence obtained illegally can't be used in court.
Yes, exactly. So that was the big argument that they had with the OJ case. You guys remember what the whole deal was there? What were they arguing against? What do they say shouldn't be allowed to be used in court?
The glove, right?
The glove, right? And why?
They hop the fence.
They hop the fence without a what?
Warrant.
See how all these things tie together, right? So they hop the fence without a warrant. They have this piece of evidence, a pretty key piece of evidence that they're going to admit into court. Yeah.
What did you say for probable cause?
For probable cause, it's just reasonable suspicion of a crime. So it's like
That's
kind of,
probable cause to me then.
it is, but also probable cause doesn't always denote entering a private property because they couldn't see the gloves, right?
Okay.
From outside the gate, they're not looking in. Their idea of probable cause, their idea of getting over the fence, if you remember what they were talking about, they said, we had reason to believe that O.J. Simpson himself could be in danger, right? Which they probably didn't think that. But they also said that they're like, well, people in his home may be in danger as well. So that's what they used, and that's how they justified their actions of entering without a search warrant. So that'll get into something that we'll talk about with the exceptions to the warrant requirement as well. But yeah, so reasonable suspicion of a crime is probable cause. The exclusionary rule, you're correct on that. Illegally obtained evidence is not admissible in court. That was the big argument there. So with that being said, what are some of the exceptions to warrant requirements?
Danger.
Danger, right? If there's gunshots, right? Something like that. If they heard gunshots coming from OJ's house, they definitely would have had an easier time, convincing everybody that it was okay that they did that without a search warrant. So yeah, active crime for sure. What else?
Obvious. Like you open a window and it smells like weed.
Yeah, smell, right? So something like that could definitely play a role. You said it yourself too. They didn't see what? What did I say?
The evidence?
Yeah, they didn't see the evidence, right? So if you do see the evidence, plain view, right? So if you get pulled over in the car, plain view is the same idea. Like if I pull you over and I'm a police officer and you have like a cracked open Modelo in your front seat or something, like that's when I know that this is probably something, maybe you're going to get in trouble for that. So plain view is a thing. Active crime is a thing. What about going to like the airport? You get searched there?
Yeah.
Yeah, often, all the time. Go through your bags all the time, right? X-ray you, do all this other stuff. Traveling, being at the border, right? If you cross over from the U.S. to Mexico, sometimes your car will be searched. Vice versa as well. Mexico to the U.S., your car will be searched often.
Borders or imaginary borders? Right?
Borders, right? Imaginary borders with the idea of airplanes is a thing, right? So getting on any sort of flight, right? You often have the ability to be searched. Another one, your car, schools, right? Public schools. And then open fields is the weird one. Open fields, right? So like a cornfield. What is the reason for open fields? Does anybody remember? There's no expectation of what? Privacy, right? There's no expectation of privacy. And that's the same thing with your car too. Like if it's an open site in your car, there's not really a huge expectation of privacy. But there are still things like, obviously there are still exceptions to that rule. If you remember our good friend with the cocaine and the gun in his car, there's obviously an exception there. They had exclusionary rule applied there because there was no immediate reason for them to enter the car. Yeah, open fields. That's like I don't know, if there was a report of a dead body in a cornfield. Shout out to Indiana, right? If that was happening, the police are able to kind of just enter onto that property and check because there's no reason that a farmer or somebody would need to have an expectation of privacy on their cornfield, right? Unless they like lived on the cornfield. Other than that, what is considered reasonable ground in public schools that allow a search without a warrant? As you said, smell of smoke is one. Another one would be like tips from students, anonymous tips. And then a third one would maybe be overheard conversation. So 52, smell of smoke, tips from students, overheard conversation. What is due process? Your right to what?
Fair treatment?
Fair treatment. What else? There's a couple of things that go together with it. What is due process? What does it mean to you?
Due process?
Dot, dot, dot.
So, let's break it down.
All right, yeah, let's break it down. How about that? Let's break it down.
Due. Like,
You are worrying me.
has to be turned in, man.
You better hope that this test is open note.
And then process. Actually, leading to something.
You're close. How about this? A right to a speedy and fair trial. See how you were so close to that, honestly.
Yeah, you could have had it.
you were right there. It was on the tip of your tongue. A right to a speedy and fair trial in front of a jury of your peers, right? What'd you do on vacation? Are you all good? Anyways, right? You flipped the golf cart?
Yeah.
Did you get checked out at the hospital?
No.
No? All right. Right to a speedy and fair trial in front of a jury of your peers, okay? Name 3 rights of the accused. If you are going to jail, you have a couple of rights. Now here, just give me 3 of them. What are 3 rights? Right to remain silent, no self-incrimination. Michael?
Speedy trial.
Speedy trial, right? We just talked about that. What's another one?
Jury.
Jury, right? There's a couple more. There's another easy one, too. What?
I don't know.
Call.
Right to a call, yeah.
Oh, yeah, one phone call.
What else? There's another, like, super big one. That's a huge one. Yeah, knowing what you're being charged with.
Oh, yeah, that works.
Notice of accusation,
No,
yeah.
No. Secret draft.
Secret, what does it mean? I've never heard that.
An
That's just,
undesirable or unfair situation. Well, I guess it's not. Look for an undesirable.
all right, sure. What else? You have a right to have what? I mean, yeah. Somebody online. You have a right.
Remain silent.
Yeah, that was one. Right to remain silent. And then think about who's representing you. My cousin who? Attorney, right? You have a right to an attorney. If you don't have one, then what? The court will provide.
You're provided with one. Oh.
Yeah, exactly. Hey, you sound like you heard that before. What's going on? Too much cops, right? All right. Okay. What is the function of the grand jury? We're almost done. I know we don't have a ton of time left in class anyway. Yeah, Michael.
Your peers.
Don't- They make the decision.
Yeah, they make the decision of whether or not you're going to do what.
Go to jail or not?
Not necessarily go to jail,
Be guilty or not, be.
but you go from grand jury to what? Yeah, Gabrielle. Yeah, so you're on the right track there, Maddie. It's whether or not you're going to go to trial, which would then deem whether or not you're going to go to jail, right, or prison. So the grand jury is what's coming through to say, like, hey, there's enough here for us to have like a full-blown this lawyer versus that lawyer type of situation. What is double jeopardy? Almost done. Can't be tried twice, right? For what?
The same.
The same thing if acquitted once, okay? Gabrielle, what was the notice of accusation?
The right to be informed of the nature and cause of the accusation.
Exactly, right to know what you're being charged with. It's no different than like if you were getting evicted and you had to go to court, the right to be, charged with your actual eviction. What is cruel and unusual punishment? That is just punishment that is excessive, unusual, or unfounded, especially in relation to the crime. And then the two extra questions I had were like, what's a company that's responsible for one of the vaccines? What's one of them?
I'd say Catalyst, is that wrong?
I don't know. Is it?
I don't know.
I hadn't heard of Catalyst.
I think they have a place in Bloomington.
Yeah, what's
That's
that?
why I heard it. That's something to do.
One of the big ones I think is like Johnson & Johnson. And then I don't know, does anybody know, is the maker of Pfizer and Moderna, is that the name of the companies? I think it is, right?
Yeah.
Did you say Kellogg's? That's the name of the companies, isn't it?
They got the vaccine and, they got.
And then what was the state with zero restrictions that opened up? Texas, right? Yeah. Okay. So test is on Friday. All right. Make sure that you study this stuff. It will help you out. Those of you online, you guys are good to go. Excellent work today. Thank you for all your participation.